I like how it says ready, set, boom. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm Raph. That's my podcast t-shirt. And that's James over there. Hold on. That's no, that way.
I'm
This
one of the
two over to the
ways.
right of me.
I like how you've matched today. We've recorded two so far, and your shirts are slowly matching my sweatshirt. So I appreciate.
That's right.
That.
I'm eventually, if we record any more of these, I'll end up wearing it. Although it's gorgeous outside, if I wear a sweatshirt, I'll be too hot. So, but yeah, man. So cool episode that stems from the Twitter conversation or a Twitter thread, as many of these do. Brought on somebody that I haven't hasn't been on the show previously. I don't think.
No,
Mr.
I don't
Nathan
think
Hamiel.
so.
How you doing, man?
Good. Just living the dream, swimming through the AI paradise.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and why that comment is relevant, because the AI comment is funny. We were talking about this off air.
Sure. So my name is Nathan Hamill. I lead the fundamental and applied research team. I'm senior director of research at a company called Kudelski Security. So what my team does is focus on emerging technologies. So usually all of the buzzwords kind of fall under that, everything from AI to Web3 to privacy engineering to advanced cryptography, those kind of things. That's the kind of area. Quantum security, all those things are areas that kind of fall into my area, my bucket. I've been on the Black Hat Review Board for over 13 years now. So I've spent a lot of time on a bunch of different tracks, and I'm the current track lead for the AI, machine learning, and data science track. So I'm always riding a fine line between totally overhyped and haters. So I think that's a great place for a security professional to be, is like right in the middle, because it's really, you're in the thick of it, even though it feels like you're being beaten down sometimes, either by hype or haters. So it's
or both. Sometimes
or both at the same time, which is like super fun.
That's a great time. I've had that great time a few times. So look, we're going to talk about hype in the industry, and no better time to talk about that. Absolutely no better time to talk about that than just about 2 weeks before before RSA conference kicks off in San Francisco, the yearly vendor palooza, where everybody is hyping themselves more than the last guy who has to outdo everybody last year. Do you remember how many vendors there were last year? I heard some obscene number.
No, there's always a lot.
Too many.
And I think, some of it is, established vendors, and some of it is obviously startups, and they have deep pockets for getting their names out. And I go back and forth, because at a certain point, we need tools to do our jobs. I mean, we can't be security professionals without some tools, but we've all seen, claims from vendors that are impossible, or that are not being honest about. So it's, once again, it runs the gambit between, overhyped. The marketing department obviously went wild with the facts, and, with truly useful,
Fast and loose.
Yeah.
So look, somehow we started. I don't even remember exactly why I DM'd you about what the topic was, but it turned into essentially this industry needs a little bit of skepticism. We are entirely too ready to believe just about whatever the next insane claim is. I will caveat that by saying there's a core of us that don't believe anything.
Yeah, that's true.
And outside of that, it's different.
Yeah, I think I was a bit frustrated by the massive hype around Microsoft Security Copilot. Now let me caveat this by saying, as an industry, being overly skeptical has not served us well. We've definitely been far too much in the other column at far too many times. But With Security Copilot, I saw people basically raving and how this was going to change the industry based on a website in a minute and 30-second video. I mean, it may, but there's nothing for us to evaluate. There's no release date. There's nothing for us to even
Yeah.
see. So yeah, it was just kind of a weird thing. I just don't think we should be doing the marketing department's job for them.
It is. So, I mean, I think that demonstrates that the Microsoft PR folks nailed it.
Mhm.
And B, that we are, as a profession, as an industry, absolutely starving for something that feels real, like it can actually move the needle. Because we've been swimming in a sea of sameness and Me Too-isms for forever. Like, something truly innovative comes out and 100 Me Too's come out right after. Like, oh yeah, I do that too. Oh yeah, we do that too. Oh, we do that, but with a different dashboard. Oh, we do that with different graphs. Like now with AI, and then like the now with AI, now with magic, whatever. Now, and you're like, wow, why is this happening? But they do it because, as P.T. Barnum once said, there's a sucker born every minute, and they buy it.
Correct. And it is fun to go around the vendor area and ask all, because this isn't a new thing, right? Like we're
No.
just seeing basically something that's kind of turned into a social contagion. But the claims about use of advanced AI inside of security tooling isn't new. And I do spend a decent amount of time walking around the vendor area at Black Hat, just asking people how their products work. And you'd be surprised at how many people who are giving me presentations don't know how their product works. And they're like, oh, well, that's so-and-so, he's an engineer, he's at lunch, he can come back, you can come back later. And it's a really funny thing, because I'm asking the question not to torture the salesperson that's standing there. I'm asking the question because I'm genuinely curious. Like I want to know what approaches people are taking, and I want to know how people are solving problems, especially when you're claiming you're doing something that nobody else does. I mean, that's a pretty unique claim. I'd like to understand more about that. So I usually spend hours doing that, by the way. It's one of my favorite things to do at security conferences.
I do that, and I do quite a bit of that. I remember doing it one year. I was with Optiv, and a bunch of us from the office of the CISO walked around, and I think I told this story a bunch of times. But we started, we take a screen grab, a photo of like the placard at the booth that says what you do, and then took all the hype out of it and the logos and the colors schemes and went back to them and said, okay, which one of these is yours? And almost nobody could tell me, right? They're like, oh, these all look alike. I'm like, I know. That's my point. But the hype machine is definitely real. I mean, look, there's a point at which there are times where I wish the buyers in the industry were more skeptical. And I'm going to mention two companies, and we all know them. The one with the pew pew map, if anybody remembers them. And we'll just leave it at that. And then the other one was a couple years ago at Black Hat, right? A couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
You're probably going to mention a company that I don't want to talk about.
No, we will not talk about that. Did quantum something magical or other?
Exactly.
Time travel, teleport. I don't know what they did, but anyway, nobody really actually understood what they did. But there were articles written about how game changing the technology was without anybody ever seeing it.
Yep. And I mean, I think and if we take a step back, even like, as I spend quite a bit of time, focused on the social aspects of technology as well. I mean, even years ago, it was around attacking social networks. I mean, that was kind of the new technology. That's where everybody was going. So it was kind of fun to kind of attack that. I think at a certain level, the world is just too complicated for all of us to know how everything works. I mean, you could be the smartest person on the planet and still not know how everything works. So people mentally offload a bunch of this to vendors, to perceived experts, whether they're experts or not. So you have to mentally offload those things. And I think that it becomes a trap that people exploit. And sometimes there's just not enough people willing to question or willing to wait and see the product. Like we're talking about companies that don't have actual products that you can go and put your hands on and test and say, you made these claims. it doesn't match these claims, or you made these claims and, now you have the claim. I think that's one of my biggest problems too with the whole chat GPT phenomenon, is that it's kind of gotten us away from talking about more traditional accuracy metrics, because, we're used to seeing claims now that vendors have definitely taken advantage of accuracy metrics, because 99% effective. Well, what does that mean? On whose data? Is that my data? Is that your data? Like, where's that
It's
number
never
coming
your
from?
data,
So
Nathan. It's never
exactly.
Your data.
But
That's
we
the
don't
answer.
even
It's
have
never
that
yours.
conversation anymore. I mean, these things make mistakes sometimes. Well, that's not a valid metric that you can go and match to any particular problem. And only until recently did we have, the chat completion API, where people can actually, write function calls and integrate things like ChatGPT into your application. And I think that's going to open up the biggest can of worms ever. So I see all of these news articles written by people. I've given so many interviews that basically say, the malicious use of things like ChatGPT by attackers is overhyped. And every time I say that to somebody, then there's an article that comes out and it's like, this is a game changer for attackers. And I go and I look at the article, I look at who wrote it, and I'm like, that person did not use any of these tools that they're talking about. So if you look at the research, like people actually building malware with it, I mean, it's cool research, but we're talking about malware written in Python or Golang, and it was done for the novelty factors. Like one of them was like, we used nation state grade, nation states, only nation states have access to steganography, basically is what it said. And I'm like, as you're using the open source steganography library that anybody can grab on GitHub,
Right.
So
Hard no.
I think a lot of reporters, I mean, we live in the clickbait times, and I really think a lot of reporters really want ChatGPT to be all four horsemen of the apocalypse. And the fact of the matter is, it's good at some things, not so good at others. Like, why can't we just say, hey, let's use things for what they're good for and leave the hypey stuff behind? But it doesn't work that way.
Well, so like we did an episode a few back. Remember, James? We did a Ask ChatGPT security questions episode,
Okay.
and it was entertaining to say the least. I remember asking it like the top 5 security vendors, and 2 of them were Symantec and what was the other one? McAfee.
Yeah.
At which point I knew the data set was from like late 90s.
Okay.
Well, and never mind the fact that it can't do the simple math, right? Because every time you ask for like top 5, it would give you 7.
Yes. It's very bad at numbers. It's very bad at math too. I mean, people are trying to, to correct for that. And it's a large language model. So, I mean, that's why it's such a great writing assistant and not so great at, truth and reality. And I think it's fine if people use it for, I mean, if you want, there's so many cases out there of people using it as a research assistant, and then they reach out to people who have written papers, and that person's like, I never wrote that paper. And it's like, oh, well, I guess that's.
ChatGPT said.
Exactly. And the recent one where basically there was a university professor accused of sexual harassment, and that never happened. So we're entering in some weird territory. It can be useful if you're willing to do the work on the back end and say, okay, is all of this true? Which we know people typically aren't willing to do. Now, if you're writing a research paper, you're writing a book or something, you're probably willing to go the extra mile. But if you're just casually browsing the web, I mean, you're just going to take the advice you get. So it's we're entering a weird category of, it's useful for something like even programming, right? It can be a useful programming assistant. I wrote a paper on addressing risks with GitHub Copilot, and I included some ChatGPT stuff in there. So people are, if you're a developer and you're trying to be productive, you're going to use tools that make you productive. So, from that perspective, I don't think a tool that's not that's not helpful to a developer will be used for long, because they're going to be like, I spend more time fixing things than getting things right. Or if it's working well, they're going to continue using it. And what we should do as security professionals is make sure all the steps are in place to catch any potential vulnerabilities or
Well,
issues down the way.
So you're kind of the right person to ask this, because along the topic of the hype train, I've had this sort of thorn in my side for running for a while now with folks doing the now with AI, now with ML, on whatever product they released 3 years ago, but now it has machine learning, and then it was like, oh, now it has AI. Like AI, ML was the big term for a while. Right? It basically was it supplanted the word magic in certain certain companies' marketing, and then we went to AI. And what does that mean? And it basically said, well, it's gonna be magical. Like, it's gonna do but this is artificial intelligence isn't actually intelligence. Like, guys, this isn't. It's not gonna, like, you can't point this thing at security problems, and it's not going to solve them magically for you. And it's bothered me, because the implication to the common, not even the common person, like the average security buyer, is that this is somehow more advanced than the humans, and then the human problem solved, and it's not. It's
Correct.
just not.
Yeah, I mean, the term AI has been completely taken over. It's kind of like the word cybersecurity. A lot of people don't like that. And then crypto instead of cryptography for cryptocurrency. There's been all these fights. AI is kind of the same way. Like, I just don't even play the game. I mean, nowadays AI is a generic term that encompasses basically machine learning and deep learning. That's what people are using it as. Whereas the technical term is basically supposed to be more around AGI or ASI, which is artificial general intelligence, or artificial superintelligence, which is human level intelligence, which we don't have. So everybody's just calling everything AI now. That's a battle that I'll let philosophers and academics fight. But even I start to just use it generically. And I think you brought up a good point about security problems, because usually if you look on a spectrum of problems that are good for automation and machine learning and deep learning, it usually falls on a spectrum between how often the problem set changes in a directional line, and you usually have very static things like handwriting recognition or something, all the way down at the end, like an A is going to look like an A most of the times, and all the way up into you have something like high frequency trading or security, because those are constantly evolving sets of data, the need to adapt to certain situations. So I really think that security, at least for the time being, we can certainly find areas for automation, but the thought that ChatGPT is going to replace actual cybersecurity people is a little bit delusional at this point. Because I mean, it's not.
It depends on who you ask, Nathan. It really does depend on who you ask, because there are people.
I'm not selling anything, so I'm more inclined to.
That's the difference.
Yeah,
that is the difference, because practitioners and people that don't have a thing to sell you are skeptic. I have a thing to sell you, but I'm a skeptic. I'm not going to tell you it's all going to magically go away. Yeah.
I think really you get some of it too, though, where people, from the taking away, right? Like, you look at like low level, entry level type jobs, people will say, oh, well, it can take that, right? Like, I can take somebody with zero experience and I can have you go ask ChatGPT these simple questions, and, you can get it back. Now, it goes back to that same issue we just were talking about for the last 18 minutes, right? Which is, do you have the capability to go back and actually vet that information is right? And I think that's something that the industry struggles with for everything, whether it's choosing your vendors, anything that comes out. People just have that luxury of just saying, well, this said it, Jack over there said this was a great tool, ChatGPT said this, the whatever it said, this is the answer. I'm not gonna go. Even when we did that episode, right, Raph? I mean, here's the top 7. Okay, like, here's the top 7. Let's take it to the exec board and let's get
what do
approval.
I have to dispute that?
Right.
Yeah. So I think you brought up a good point, and that is that we as humans, we tend to look at things and oversimplify them. So I talk with a lot of people who oversimplify other people's jobs even. So if you listen to a lot of the people that say things like ChatGPT are the same on the innovation level, same as the printing press or the internet, and you look at them, they will talk about lawyers. It's like, look, it's a contract. What do you want it to say? Who are the parties? What do you want to happen if it gets violated? And boom, that's it. Or you look at even self-driving cars, which is a good one, because it's like, well, how hard can it be? Obey the speed limit, stay in the lines, don't hit things, look at signs. Like, how hard is this problem? And yet we find out that the world is far more complex.
Yeah.
So I think just like passing the bar exam or the CISSP, like if ChatGPT passes the CISSP, does that make it a security professional? It's not like security professionals sit around answering CISSP questions all day. You know,
I'm not touching that one. I'm gonna politely back away from that one, Nathan. Let's keep going. Let's not talk about
the problem with the IC squared. Oh, okay.
It might be.
I have a CISSP. It's fine.
Not knocking you for it. You know, so you bring up an interesting point. Like the problems. There is a security is not the way we look at it, right? Probably a lot of listeners look at it is it's not a discrete single problem of like identify an orange, right? Because for me, I know what an orange looks like, but how do you describe it so that so that every time you look at something, you only identify an orange, not a tangerine, right? Not a grapefruit, not a bowling ball, not a car, the orange. And so security is like that because it's identifying behaviors that are potentially step outside the norm of some model, but also they can be inside the norm of that model and still be malicious, but doing like in a series of steps or whatever. So what I'm saying is like I can identify cross-site scripting. I can identify a exploit that somebody's done before. But looking at that's not where the novelty is, I think, these days. And that's not what we keep saying like we're trying to solve. I think what we're trying to solve, you know, where the kind of the big hype trains are going is in going into the future, looking forward and saying, sure, I can identify all the pattern-based things because if everybody can't by now, then you're missing something. But how do you look at the things that we haven't figured out, the humans haven't seen yet, that the machine now needs to go, that thing's interesting, right? That's what's interesting to me. And I don't see that talked about a lot. Do you?
No, I think there are situations in which, because I think we as humans, we look at the world and we have our sensory view of the world. So you mentioned like oranges and tangerines and all that. So if you ran those images through a computer vision model, it would show you could like ask it for a description and it could show you heat maps of why it thinks that. I mean, you can do that with like cats and dogs and it kind of identifies the ears and the eyes and all those things. But it's seeing a different representation of the world. I think if we were able to use, you know, techniques, be them, you know, machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning, whatever the case may be, to identify situations which are attacks that we wouldn't have noticed on our own, that's where it can be super useful. So I think we'll never get, you know, to a utopia one way or the other, but, you know, there is a lot that happens in your brain within a split second. It's like, yeah, something isn't right here. Let me dig into this. And then you kind of find that actually was an attack. Maybe it was something new or novel. And I just don't think we're there yet. I mean, there's lots of good behavioral analysis tools that kind of help where it shows you, hey, this is outside of the normal traffic. We've kind of had those for quite some time, and they for the most part they work. You know, they work pretty well. They get some things wrong, but we're talking about a massive scale of data that wouldn't be possible for a human to go through anyway.
I think that's where, if I'm gonna allow some leeway for the hype machine, I think it's in the analysis of the technology. Like we're looking at tech that's talking about things that humans can't actually do, right? that's where I think the limitations of humanity became pretty prevalent, is when we had, we got beyond the firewall packet filtering firewall on a T1 in the 90s. The volume went up and it's not even, it wasn't a linear curve, it was exponential, right? And in some cases it was logarithmic. It was crazy, and it keeps it keeps going to, like, we're approaching that near vertical climb there. And as everything around us generates data, there was an article about how, like, I'm a big Formula One fan, so F1 cars generate like petabytes of data.
Yep.
You're like, okay, so if you're the analyst staring like at the tire pressure, lateral accelerometer, engine temperature, and look at all these gauges, like the guy that's done that a million times, the gal that's done that a million times, you start to see patterns. You're like, oh, I know what that means. That means there's going to be an engine failure, or that means there's one of the tires is wearing thin on this side, or the brake bias is wrong, or whatever. But I can't imagine doing it on more than like a small cluster of the things that your brain can handle. You do that, expand that across the entire telemetry of what that car is streaming, no chance. Even that entire wall of pit crews has to be using technology to tell it where to go look for the interesting things that then the human brain has that. I don't know. There's something that separates us from machines. And I think that's the thing. That thing you've identified, that's the thing. It's like, that looks interesting.
Yep.
Maybe it's timing, maybe it's presentation, maybe it's something, but that makes your brain go, that's interesting. I think that I don't know if we're going to ever solve that by machines.
Yeah, I think that, the problem with, like, I've been railing against a lot of the hype for quite some time, and you get labeled like a contrarian or like an anti-technology zealot or something, and I'm talking about the hype. I'm actually into the technology, but what happens when you have overhyped technology is you see a bunch of demos, you don't know how it works, but you're getting the right answer, so you're like, this must be working. But machine learning, not implemented properly, has a way of giving you the right answer for the wrong reasons. And that can be dangerous, because as you roll this out and the problems get fixed or the data changes, now you're in a very bad spot, because now you're not getting any alerts where you were getting things before. And then you call the vendor, and the vendor doesn't know why things aren't working. And you don't know why things are working. Nobody seems to know why it's working. So I'm just trying to be, I'm just trying to add a bit of caution to the conversation.
Nathan, it's not like we haven't, like I said, we've all got examples where it's, you let yourself kind of relax for a minute and go, all right, I trust these people that are over there. This can't possibly be all hype. And I've gotten burned on it a couple times too. Right. And, like I said, whose data set does this work on? Not yours is the answer. It's always the answer. It's the pre-canned data set that we've created for this demo. And that's just, that's how, if you've ever given a presentation live with live data, exactly why you always bring your own data, because it never quite works right in the presence of that moment.
For sure.
And as a vendor, you want to, put your best foot forward and show everybody that it's working great and that things are awesome. And
do we need the hype machine, though, to help keep that optimism that there is that potential? Even if it's not working at this point, there's the potential that we could do something like this. I mean, when you mentioned before some of this stuff, I think back to like DEF CON years ago when they had like that Bluetooth sniper rifle, right? They could like pick up Bluetooth from like 18 miles away, right? And it's like, that's pretty cool technology. Is it useful? Not in any application, right? So, but it gets you that, like, wow, what could we really do with this? Maybe it doesn't meet the 80% rule.
I would say that's hype versus stunt hacking, right? So I see those as like two different things. I mean, so stunt hacking can have its benefits by inspiring people to think about ideating those attacks against other things. So some of what we're seeing with ChatGPT right now is basically stunt hacking. It doesn't have a lot of impact. It shows that, hey, some of the guardrails aren't implemented properly. To me, when it gets to like the hype, I really tried to rack my brain about why I'm sitting here and everyone around me is like raving about how this is going to change the world. I'm like, is something wrong with me? Like, what am I not seeing that they're seeing? And there really is. I mean, I need to sit and just do some free writing on this, but there really does seem to be some cases here. I mean, we're in a bunch of economic uncertainty. We just came out of a pandemic. I think there's a lot of social and cultural things that are kind of fueling this is kind of pushing behind ChatGPT, put it that way. So there are some things that have nothing to do with technology that I think possibly could be fueling this even a bit more, because everybody seems to be talking about it.
Well, I wish I was that optimistic. The things that I see in the marketing, and maybe this is a factor of I don't know what the factor is, but I see it most often in on the extreme ends of either brand new companies that just desperately need to be noticed, like market needs to notice them and they have to somehow do something even crazier every time to be noticed, right? This is like both Black Hat and RSA are now victim to this. It's crazy because you have to make more and more outrageous claims for somebody to notice you, for somebody to go, oh, it's actually something different, as opposed to you're one of everybody else. So I think this is sort of a self-perpetuating machine now. The more this, every time it happens, it adds more fuel to the fire, which means the next claim has to be crazier. And it's like with politicians, you just have to keep feeding that hype machine until I don't know where this ends. But I'm concerned because there are legitimate problems to solve. There are legitimately good technologies that can address those problems. And because we are probably going to burn more and more people on this, we're either going to create people, buyers that don't believe anything, which is going to be bad for us, or we're going to fuel up this hype machine so bad that the only claims are going to be the ones that are so outrageous they can't possibly be true.
Yeah, it's that you hit the nail on the head with the marketing side. Like you have to add your own spin on what you're doing, even though it's the same as everyone else. So in that seeking to add that spin, you add more and more claims on top of what you say you're doing. I think another thing, at least fueling the ChatGPT craze, because I get beaten over the head with the overhyped ChatGPT with attackers thing. So it's a really sore subject with me when somebody comes out with like a quote, like some CEO comes out and says, "Hey, this is going to change the world for better for the attackers," and it's all these claims, and I think it's part of a social phenomenon. So I mean, scientists have kind of found that when people kind of see something as being a consensus, they kind of internalize that viewpoint as their own. I mean, it's something we've seen in social networks. It's been part of society for a long time. So it's predated like, social media, but it really escalates on social media. So you have a lot of security leaders who read a lot of high level articles talking about how, ChatGPT is going to supercharge attackers. Then they go and give interviews where they say ChatGPT is going to supercharge attackers. And then they pair it to other people who parrot that comment, and we end up with this massive echo chamber of people saying ChatGPT is going to supercharge attackers without realizing we have ChatGPT today. This isn't a future state. It's here now. So where are all the supercharged attackers? Because you'd think we would see some meaningful change even by now. I mean, it's been out for a while, and attackers are usually pretty good at exploiting technology before defenders. And this is something we know.
Right.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me when you look at the facts. And after you've used the technology for a while, use the actual chat product, use the API, you kind of understand why some things happen. you have to spend time with it to kind of really see like, hey, prompt injection, I see how that works. Look, I made this call to once you deconstruct the API, you can start to look and see how the calls are made. It really does make a lot more sense. So, and you only get that perspective by actually using the tools. And I can tell whenever I see one of these articles pop up and I start reading just a couple of paragraphs, I'm like, this person has not used this tool. They've not used ChatGPT.
Well, that's a cycle of like security industry. I've said this for years, right? Like we are built on marketing. Anything you do to get out there, whether it's doing your own research, quoted in articles for anything like that, it's how do I get my organization out there in the news, doing a quote. And you know what? If I saw XYZ say something, right, what's going to help me in my position? It's going to be, oh, let me support that person because it's a well-known person. I don't even have to read it. They said it's a thing. I'm going to go say it's a thing, right? We have that cycle where we just constantly, like you said, the echo chamber of, a couple people started saying it. Now everybody says, I say it's the same thing about the time change. Like nobody would complain about the time change if one person hadn't started complaining about it and everybody heard and said, oh, I'm so tired. Like, whatever, it's an hour. It's not a big deal, right? But as soon as one person starts saying it and then 5 people start saying it, everybody wants to jump on that wagon and be like, yeah, wait a minute, that is a problem for me. And it just, social media helps expound that, but that's what starts happening is you get a few people that have a lot of followers and, people want to push them up because that's going to help pull them up.
Influencers, man, influencers.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody takes a reputational hit for saying the same thing as everyone else. Like you don't pay a price. Like most of the time I see ridiculous claims, but most people don't. Nobody's going to go back and read your blog post 4 years from now and say, wow, that person was really wrong. We live so in the moment.
Right.
And if you're saying the same things as other people, it's not like you're going to take a reputational hit for it 2 years later when you were wrong, like when attackers aren't supercharged or when it wasn't as influential as the printing press, or it's really not that reliable for most things. So I think it will affect people's jobs, especially creative, like people, freelance creative artists, like have to be hating things like ChatGPT and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, because I mean, if you're a freelancer who works independently on marketing campaigns and stuff, people are just going to click a button 5 times and get an piece of art that they like, and they're just going to use that. So it really does devalue like things that freelancers would do. There's even stories of like copywriters who are now being asked to proofread ChatGPT output for less money than actually writing the copy, which is what they normally do. So basically we're turning into like AI janitors.
Yeah, you see it with some of these apps now that are offering like the text to image generators. Like here, just describe what you want and it'll just create that image for you. It's it's really interesting to see some of the uses that are out there of being able to create that. We've seen the stories of sensitive information leakage where the exec throws his financial outlook in there and then it spits out his PowerPoint presentation for him like that. It's going to be interesting to see how people go about using it. But, I think, again, some of that stuff is, somebody said this is the next thing. I'll just start using it because somebody else said to use it. And you're right to the point, even 2 days later, never mind 2 years later, you can be proven wrong 2 days later, but nobody cares.
Nobody remembers anymore.
Right. That's why the headlines go out there like that. That's why we say everything is so glorified because, you know what, even if I'm wrong tomorrow, nobody will care. I think it's interesting to see we started this conversation, with Microsoft kind of, a web page and a 1-minute video. Like they're taking the same tactics that we've seen from the other side where it's like, all right, we're going to drop it on this date. And we've got a logo, a theme song, and, this thing is going to be the worst thing that's ever happened. And then how many times has it been anywhere near that hype level? But a week later, nobody cares. Like everybody got in a frazzle. They got all about it. And then it's like, yeah, that was whatever. It wasn't no big deal, right? I can't wait for the next logo and theme song to come out. Like good for them to follow that same path, like generate the hype around it.
I guess if you spend $10 billion on something, you need to do something with it.
Yeah.
So.
Look, so we're kind of up on, or maybe quite past time. Where is this all headed to? What like what's the, I don't know, what's the logical next because progression here? Because we are pretty far down the hype machine. Like we are in a hype bubble. This industry, this profession is in a hype bubble. Are we? I talked to a financial analyst that looks at markets, and she basically said, "You guys are in that space. The housing market was at in 2000, right before 2008, like July, August 2008, where everybody's looking around and going, this doesn't, something's wrong. Every suddenly that 2 bedroom 500 square foot house is $1.5 million, like something's wrong here." And that's right before the thing just goes. Are we there? Are we expecting an implosion?
I'm probably not the right person to ask about this, because I usually don't do like my marketing. I probably shouldn't talk about my company, but my marketing department always asks me to do predictions for the next year. I'm like, I don't want to do them because every time somebody does predictions, they're either painfully obvious or they're wrong. The world is far too complex for us to make predictions, and I think making predictions actually rewards people who do them, even though they're not accurate. Right. So we live in the moment. So it rewards a very hypey thing. So I'm kind of a bit more conservative about it. I think so now after I caveat that, now I'll make a semi prediction. So I'll look like an idiot in a year and a half.
Nobody will remember,
dude. So I think where all of this is headed is that, security is still a very human focused problem. There's a bunch of complexity there. So I don't see silver bullet tooling anytime soon. I have said, once again, caveat, here I am. Sometimes I throw things out on social media, which I probably shouldn't, but I said, I feel that all the hype around AI in general may actually cause another AI winter. And that would be kind of very bad, because, it's not that these tools aren't useful for some things. It's that we've built them up. There are people who think that GPT-5 is going to be AGI. And I don't see it, because I think GPT-5 will be a better version of GPT-4, which is nowhere near even being able to reason. So I think what we're going to have happen is I think we'll have some kind of scaling back on the tooling side. We'll still need people to kind of do the work. And I think we'll be in a much the same position. I know there's been a bunch of companies cutting back on like people. I don't know how much of that percentage is actually security people. So a bunch of tech people, or a bunch of tech companies had a bunch of layoffs. I don't know what percentage of that was security people, but it seems to me like security strategy, being able to kind of do technical assessments. I mean, these are skills that are going to be very valuable. It's not like we built a reinforcement learning agent that can just adversarially run around your network and find all the flaws so that humans don't need to do it. So, yeah, I think we'll be in much the same case, maybe with the same or similar tooling in the next few years. I think we will be left with a legacy of some of these large language models being left partly implemented and partly working inside of some of our tooling, which is very bad. Like the real security issues with large language models is their hapless integration into absolutely everything around us. Because I don't think people realize that you can actually interrupt the execution of the application, depending on where we have indirect prompt injection. So you can actually interrupt. You have formerly had an app that was fairly robust. Now you've just basically opened up a gaping hole. So I've explained it as these models are basically a single interface, like text, images, whatever the case may be, with an unlimited number of undocumented protocols. So people keep finding ways around the guardrails. They keep tricking the system into a different state. Like, these are undocumented protocols, and we know that that's not good for security. We know not understanding how it
time.
works is not good.
Yeah, undocumented. I'm going to make a blanket statement and say undocumented profiles, or sorry, undocumented protocols and API endpoints and stuff like that in our systems is absolutely a bad thing. There's no good way to make that happen. So, all right, Nathan, thanks for spending some time with us and giving us the last 45 minutes or so. Yeah, man.
Appreciate it. Anytime.
We should create a T-shirt that says the Skeptic Society of Cyber.
Well, I wanted a shirt that says Extinction Engineer. So maybe I'll make one for Black Hat.
Yeah, that would be a good. We can make those. I mean, look, we've got these made, right? So you can make anything you want. I'll bring you one of these for Black Hat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I've got a bunch of them. I've got a small stack. After I moved, I realized that from like RSA conference like 3-4 years ago, Microsoft made a bunch of these for us, and I found them in a box. I was like, oh hey, I have a few left. So all right, folks, thanks for listening. Nathan Hamill regaled us with his snarkiness as always. Hey, healthy dose of skepticism keeps us alive, my friend. That's how we survived as a species. So, all right, folks, thanks for listening. Hopefully by now you have transitioned your RSS feeder and all the links and whatnot where you find this podcast to dtsr.buzzsprout.com. We've moved off of Libsyn into Buzzsprout. Otherwise, you're not getting this, and you're wondering why the feed stopped. So, also check out the YouTube version of these videos. We post these out and let them go when our guests allow us. Nathan's been gracious enough to give us video, and so check it out that way. All right, that's been another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast gone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Cue the music. We'll catch you next time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.